The fluorescent lights above the hospital bed were the last thing I expected to burn into my memory that day. But there I was, lying there with monitors beeping around me, watching my husband Robert lean against the doorframe, laughing with a nurse who couldn't have been more than 25. His hand was on her lower back, that same hand that used to hold mine during my treatments. I remember thinking how strange it was that my heart rate monitor didn't spike right then, watching him touch her like that. Maybe I was already dead inside and just didn't know it yet. The room smelled like antiseptic and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or betrayal, the kind of scent that sticks in your nostrils long after you've left the place. I could hear their laughter mixing with the mechanical beeping of my heart monitor, creating this surreal symphony of my life falling apart. The IV in my arm felt heavy, cold liquid trickling into my veins while I watched my marriage bleed out in the doorway. I wanted to say something, scream maybe, ask what the hell he thought he was doing, but my throat felt tight, constricted, like someone had wrapped invisible hands around it. So I just lay there, a silent witness to my own humiliation, wondering if this was what dying felt like. Not the physical kind the doctors kept warning me about, but the emotional kind, the soul kind. 3 months earlier, I was still convinced I was the luckiest woman alive. We lived in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Phoenix, the kind with a front porch that needed painting and a yard full of succulents that somehow survived despite my complete lack of gardening skills. Robert worked as a manager at a logistics company, and I had taken early retirement due to my heart condition. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Or at least, I thought we were. The house had been my mother's before she passed. She'd left it to me with the hope that Robert and I would fill it with children and laughter. We'd managed neither. The room stayed empty except for our accumulated possessions, the silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and whatever was playing on Robert's television. He'd taken over the living room years ago, claimed it as his domain. I learned to exist quietly in the kitchen, the bedroom, the spaces he didn't occupy. Every Tuesday, I'd buy a lottery ticket at the corner store on Camelback Road. It was my little ritual, my tiny rebellion against the practicality that had defined my entire life. $5 a week for a dream. Robert used to roll his eyes at it, call it a waste of money. But I kept doing it anyway. Something about those numbers felt like mine, like a secret I was keeping from the universe. The clerk at the store, an older man named Miguel, always smiled when he saw me coming. He never asked about my health, never looked at me with that pitying expression I'd grown so accustomed to. He just handed me my ticket, wished me luck, and sent me on my way. Those 30 seconds of normalcy became the highlight of my week. Pathetic, really, when you think about it. But when you're drowning, you grab onto whatever floats. The day I won, I was sitting in the cardiologist's waiting room, scrolling through my phone to distract myself from the anxiety. $26 million. The numbers on the screen didn't feel real. I checked them 3 times against my ticket, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Something told me to wait, to think, to plan. Looking back now, that instinct might have saved my life. I sat there in that waiting room, surrounded by other patients with their own ailments and worries, holding a piece of paper worth more money than I'd ever imagined. The woman next to me was knitting something blue, her needles clicking rhythmically. An old man across from me dozed in his chair, his mouth slightly open. Life continued around me, ordinary and mundane, while my entire existence had just shifted on its axis. My mind raced through possibilities. What would Robert say? Would he be happy? Relieved? We could pay off the house, his car, my medical bills. We could travel, maybe. See all those places I'd marked in magazines but never thought we'd afford. We could finally relax, stop worrying about money, about the future. We could be happy again. Except we weren't happy now, were we? Not really. When was the last time he'd looked at me with anything resembling affection? When was the last time we'd had a conversation that didn't revolve around bills or appointments or his complaints about work? When was the last time he'd touched me without it feeling like an obligation? The nurse called my name, and I stood up, tucking the ticket deep into my purse. Not yet, I told myself. Not until I figured out what this meant. Not until I understood what I was really holding in my hands. Freedom, maybe, or a test. Either way, I needed time to think. Robert drove me home from that appointment, complaining the entire way about traffic, about his boss, about the cost of my medications. I sat there with my secret burning a hole in my purse, watching him grip the steering wheel with white knuckles, and wondered when exactly he'd stopped asking how I was feeling. The traffic on the I-10 was its usual nightmare, cars packed bumper to bumper under the relentless Arizona sun. Robert's jaw was clenched, a muscle twitching near his temple. He kept switching lanes aggressively, as if getting one car length ahead would somehow make a difference. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, this man I'd spent nearly 2 decades with, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. The doctor said my heart rate is irregular again. I offered quietly, testing to see if he'd heard me, if he cared. He responded, not taking his eyes off the road, not asking what that meant, what they planned to do about it, if I was scared. Just an acknowledgement that I'd spoken, nothing more. I turned to look out the window, watching the desert landscape blur past. Somewhere in my purse, that ticket sat waiting. 26 million reasons to start asking myself hard questions. That night, I lay awake listening to him snore, thinking about what $26 million meant. Freedom, obviously. Security. The ability to actually afford the treatments my insurance barely covered. But more than that, it meant choices. And I hadn't had those in a very long time. The ceiling fan rotated slowly above us, its familiar squeak marking each revolution. I'd asked Robert to fix it months ago, but he never got around to it. Added it to the growing list of things he'd promised to do, but hadn't. The house was full of those half-finished projects, physical manifestations of his decreasing investment in our life together. I turned my head to look at him in the darkness. His mouth was open slightly, that snore that used to seem endearing now, just another irritation. Who was this man? And who had I become, lying next to him night after night, pretending everything was fine? The money changed something in me, even though no one else knew about it yet. It gave me permission to ask questions I'd been too afraid to voice. If I didn't need Robert financially, did I need him at all? If I could afford to live on my own, pay for my own care, make my own decisions, what exactly was keeping me here? Love? I searched my heart for that feeling, that warmth I remembered from our early days. But all I found was habit, familiarity, the fear of being alone, and underneath it all, a growing resentment that felt like acid in my chest. I know you're probably screaming at your screen right now, telling me to just tell him and get it over with. But you have to understand something about being sick for years, about depending on someone for every doctor's visit, every prescription pickup, every moment you're too weak to stand. You start to believe you owe them something. You start to think their frustration is justified because you're such a burden. Society teaches us this, especially women of my generation. We're supposed to be grateful for being taken care of, even when that care comes with a price tag of our dignity. We're supposed to smile and say thank you while we're being diminished, dismissed, and slowly erased. My mother lived this way. I watched her make herself smaller and smaller to accommodate my father's ego, his temper, his needs. She called it marriage, called it commitment, called it love. I called it slow suicide, but I never said it out loud. And here I was, decades later, repeating the pattern I'd sworn to break. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur. I kept going to my appointments, kept taking my pills, kept playing the role of grateful wife while my winning ticket sat in a safety deposit box at a bank Robert didn't even know I used. I'd opened that account years ago with money my mother left me, just a small nest egg I'd never touched. Now it held the secret that would either destroy my marriage or reveal it was already destroyed. Opening that safety deposit box became its own ritual. I'd drive to the bank on days when Robert was at work, sign in with the clerk who never asked questions, and sit in that small private room with my ticket. Just looking at it, holding it, reminding myself it was real. I researched everything about lottery winnings, how to claim anonymously, how to protect assets in a divorce, whether Arizona was a community property state. I became an expert in financial planning and legal protections, all while maintaining the facade of the simple housewife who barely understood our checking account. The irony wasn't lost on me. Robert had always managed our finances, insisting I didn't need to worry about such things. He gave me an allowance for groceries and household expenses, parceling out money like I was a child who couldn't be trusted. I'd accepted this arrangement for years, told myself it was easier to let him handle it. But now, sitting in that bank with information about millions of dollars, I realized his control had been deliberate. Keep me dependent, keep me uninformed, keep me powerless. It's harder to leave when you don't even know how much money you have or where it goes. Robert had been different lately, more critical, more absent. He'd come home late, claiming overtime, smelling like perfume I didn't wear. When I asked about it, he'd turn it around on me, say I was being paranoid, controlling, that my medications were making me crazy. And I believed him. God help me, I believed him because I'd been taught that family came first, that loyalty meant suffering in silence, that a good wife didn't make waves. There was this one evening, about 2 weeks after I'd won, when he came home almost 3 hours late. I'd made dinner, let it get cold, reheated it, and watched it congeal again. When he finally walked in the door, I could smell her on him, floral, sweet, young. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Work," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I told you we had that project deadline." "On a Friday night?" His jaw tightened. "Are you questioning me? After everything I do for you? After I spend my entire day working to pay for your medications and your appointments and your special dietary needs?" I felt myself shrinking, that familiar retreat into silence. "No, You just what? Want to make me feel guilty for having a career? For having a life outside of being your caretaker?" Caretaker. The word hit me like a slap. That's how he saw himself, not as my husband, not as my partner, as someone burdened with my care. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say, hating the words even as they left my mouth. "I didn't mean to upset you." He brushed past me without responding, heading for the shower. I stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my wasted effort, and felt something harden inside me. The ticket in that safety deposit box suddenly felt less like a secret and more like a lifeline. My mother used to say that about my father, even when he drank away their savings, even when he screamed at her for burning dinner. Family first, loyalty above all. I watched her shrink into herself year after year, and I swore I'd never be like that. But here I was, 40 years later, making the same excuses for different abuse. I could still picture my mother in our old kitchen, moving quietly so as not to wake my father when he was sleeping off a bender. She'd hum these sad little songs while she cleaned up whatever mess he'd made the night before. I asked her once why she stayed. I must have been 12 or 13, old enough to see but not old enough to understand. She looked at me with these tired eyes and said, "Because that's what love is, sweetheart, staying even when it's hard." But she was wrong. I see that now. That wasn't love. That was fear dressed up in noble language, fear of being alone, fear of what people would think, fear of admitting she'd wasted her life on someone who didn't deserve her. And I'd learned her lesson too well. The thing about psychological abuse is that it doesn't leave bruises you can photograph. It leaves you questioning your own perception of reality. Did he really say that cruel thing, or am I being too sensitive? Is he really lying, or am I just paranoid? After a while, you can't trust your own mind anymore. Robert was a master at this. He'd say something cruel, then deny he'd said it. He'd make promises and claim he never had when I reminded him. He'd tell me I was remembering things wrong, that my medications were affecting my memory, that I was being irrational. I started writing things down after a while, just little notes on my phone, dated and time-stamped. What he said, what he did. Not because I was planning anything, but because I needed proof for myself that I wasn't crazy, that these things were really happening. Looking back at those notes now, they paint a picture I couldn't see when I was living it. A systematic pattern of degradation, of isolation, of control. Each individual incident seemed minor, easily explained away, but together they told a story of calculated cruelty. I remember one night. About a month after winning, we were having dinner. I'd made his favorite, pot roast with those little red potatoes he liked. He barely touched it, said it was dry, said I never could cook meat right. Then he got up, dumped his plate in the sink, and left for a work thing. On a Saturday night. A work thing. The pot roast wasn't dry. I knew it wasn't. I'd used a meat thermometer, followed the recipe my mother had given me, done everything right. But I found myself cutting a piece, tasting it, wondering if maybe I had somehow ruined it, wondering if my perception of reality was really that skewed. I sat there alone at our dining room table, looking at the meal I'd spent 3 hours preparing despite my fatigue, and something in me cracked, not broke, cracked, like ice on a windshield after the first stone hits. The break was coming, but it hadn't shattered yet. I picked up my phone and took a picture of the pot roast, added it to my growing collection of documentation. Timestamp 7:43 p.m. Note, pot roast, perfectly moist. He said it was dry and left. Then I packaged up the leftovers and put them in the fridge, where they'd sit untouched until I threw them away a week later. These small rebellions became my way of maintaining sanity, documenting reality so I couldn't be convinced it was different, holding on to my own perceptions even when he tried to reshape them. It wasn't much, but it was something. I started noticing things after that, small things. Receipts in his pockets for restaurants we'd never been to together. Charges on our credit card statement for flowers I never received. Phone calls he'd taken in the garage, coming back inside with that fake casual smile. Each discovery was another crack, another fissure in the ice. The credit card statement was particularly enlightening. I'd gotten into the habit of checking it online, something Robert didn't know I did. He thought I was too technologically challenged to navigate the website. Another assumption he'd encouraged, another way of keeping me dependent and uninformed. But there they were, line after line of charges that told a story he wasn't telling me. Dinner at Marcello's, a romantic Italian place we'd talked about going to for our anniversary, but never had. $273. Flowers from Desert Blooms, delivered somewhere that wasn't our house. $95. A hotel in Scottsdale on a night he'd claimed to be working late. $312. I screenshot every suspicious charge, created a folder on my phone labeled Recipes that actually contained evidence of my husband's double life. The deception felt fitting somehow. You know what's worse than finding out you're being betrayed? Finding out everyone else already knew. I ran into our neighbor Helen at the grocery store one day, and the way she looked at me, this mixture of pity and discomfort, I just knew. She knew. Probably the whole neighborhood knew. I was the only fool who'd convinced herself everything was fine. Helen had been loading her car with groceries, and we'd made eye contact across the parking lot. For a second, I thought she might pretend she hadn't seen me, just drive away and avoid the awkwardness. But she walked over, slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "How are you doing?" she asked, and there was too much weight in the question, too much meaning. "I'm fine," I said automatically, then wondered why I was still lying, still protecting him, still maintaining the illusion. "If you ever need anything," Helen said carefully, "if you ever need to talk, or anything, I'm right next door." "Thank you," I said, my smile feeling plastic on my face. But really, everything's fine. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes sad, then squeezed my hand and walked back to her car. I stood there in the grocery store parking lot, my frozen foods slowly melting in the Phoenix heat, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd seen something. Maybe Robert with another woman. Maybe him talking about me in ways that made it obvious our marriage was a sham. Whatever it was, she knew. And she wasn't the only one. I spent so much energy trying to be enough for him, enough wife, enough companion, enough housekeeper despite barely having the strength to vacuum. I sacrificed my dignity in 1,000 tiny ways, swallowing his criticisms, laughing off his dismissals, pretending his coldness didn't cut me to the bone. Every morning I'd wake up and think, today I'll be better. I'll be the wife he wants. I'll be enough. I'd put on makeup even when I felt awful to hide how sick I looked. I'd cook meals that met his exacting standards. I'd keep the house spotless despite my exhaustion. I'd laugh at his jokes, agree with his opinions, make myself as pleasant and unobtrusive as possible. And it was never enough, because the problem wasn't me. The problem was that he didn't want a wife. He wanted an appliance that cooked and cleaned and didn't require emotional investment. And when even that became too much maintenance, when my heart condition demanded his attention and care, he checked out entirely. But I couldn't see that then. I just kept trying harder, thinking if I could just get it right, he'd love me again. He'd see me again. He'd remember why he married me in the first place. There was this dinner party at his colleague's house. I'd forced myself to go despite feeling awful, put on makeup to hide how pale I was, wore the dress he'd once said he liked. The whole night, he acted like I wasn't there. Literally turned his back to me during conversations, laughed at jokes about nagging wives, introduced me as just my name. No mention that I was his partner of 18 years. I stood there smiling, playing along, dying inside. His colleague's wife, Jennifer, tried to include me in conversations. Asked about my health, what I did with my time, normal, polite questions. Every time I started to answer, Robert would interrupt or change the subject. Redirect attention to himself, to work, to anything but me. At one point, someone made a joke about old married couples sleeping in separate rooms. Robert laughed louder than anyone. Might not be the worst idea, he said, and everyone chuckled uncomfortably. I felt my face burn, tried to laugh along like it was funny, like my husband hadn't just publicly suggested he didn't want to share a bed with me. Jennifer caught my eye and quickly looked away. The pity there was unmistakable. I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the closed toilet lid, taking deep breaths, trying not to cry and ruin my makeup. My reflection in the mirror looked haunted. Who was this woman? When had I become someone who accepted being humiliated at dinner parties? The worst part? I went home and apologized to him. Apologized for not being more social, for looking tired, for existing in a way that apparently embarrassed him. He accepted my apology without even looking up from his phone. We drove home in silence, and when we got to the house, I turned to him. "I'm sorry I wasn't better tonight," I said, the words bitter on my tongue. He glanced at me, thumb still scrolling on his phone. "Yeah, you should probably skip the next one. Nobody wants to deal with your health drama." My health drama, as if I'd chosen to be sick, as if my cardiac condition was some inconvenient personality flaw I could just decide to overcome. "Okay," I whispered, because what else could I say? He got out of the car without another word. I sat there in the driveway for 10 minutes, staring at our house, thinking about $26 million sitting in a safety deposit box, thinking about freedom, thinking about how much more of this I could take before there was nothing left of me to save. That's what sacrifice looks like when you've been convinced you don't deserve better. It looks like erasing yourself piece by piece until there's nothing left but the outline of who you used to be. I found myself going through old photo albums late at night when Robert was at his mysterious meetings. There was this picture from our honeymoon in Santa Fe, me laughing at something he'd said, my whole face lit up with joy. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that. Couldn't remember the last time he'd tried to make me laugh. We'd been so happy in Santa Fe. Or at least, I thought we had been. We spent our days exploring art galleries and eating at small cafes. Our nights were tender, intimate, full of promises about the future we'd build together. I traced the face of that younger me with my finger, trying to remember what she'd been thinking. What had he said that made her laugh like that? What dreams was she dreaming? What had she hoped this marriage would become? If I could go back and warn her, what would I say? Would I tell her to run? To look more carefully at the red flags she was already ignoring? To trust her instincts when something felt off? Or would she have married him anyway, convinced she could make it work? Convinced that love was enough? Had I really given up that woman for this? For a man who couldn't even sit through dinner with me? For a marriage that had become nothing more than shared bills and sleeping in the same bed? My friend Nancy called me out of the blue one Tuesday morning. We'd lost touch years ago after Robert said she was a bad influence, too opinionated, too loud. I should have known then that anyone he wanted me away from was probably someone telling me the truth. I almost didn't answer when her name flashed on my screen. Years of Robert's programming made me hesitate. But I was alone in the house, and that ticket in the safety deposit box had made me braver than I'd been in years. Nancy. Oh my God, she actually answered. Nancy's voice was exactly as I remembered, warm and alive and real. I half expected you to block my number. Why would I do that? Because Robert probably told you I was Satan incarnate after our last conversation. She wasn't wrong. He'd said she was jealous, toxic, trying to poison our marriage with her radical feminist nonsense. I'd believed him then. But hearing her voice now, I realized how much I'd missed having a friend. Nancy was in town for work and wanted to meet for coffee. I almost said no. The old me would have checked with Robert first, made sure he didn't need me for anything. But something about that lottery ticket sitting in my safety deposit box made me feel brave. So I said yes. Tomorrow at 10? That coffee shop in Scottsdale. The one with the weird artwork? Lux Central? That's the one. Meet me there. We have a lot to catch up on. After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Excitement. The prospect of spending time with someone who actually wanted my company, who saw me as more than an obligation or a burden. Robert asked me that night where I was going the next morning. I told him I was meeting Nancy. Watched his expression darken. Nancy? I thought you weren't friends with her anymore. I never said that. You said that. His eyes narrowed. She's not good for you. Fills your head with nonsense. It's just coffee, Robert. Whatever, don't blame me when she upsets you. But I knew who was really afraid of being upset, and it wasn't me. We met at this little cafe in Scottsdale, the kind with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Nancy hadn't changed, still had that direct way of looking at you, like she could see through all the pretense to what was really going on. We'd barely sat down when she asked me how I was. Really asked, not the automatic greeting kind of question. I started crying right there. In the middle of this hipster coffee shop, ugly crying into my overpriced latte. It all came pouring out. Robert's coldness, the unexplained absences, the way he made me feel like I was crazy for noticing anything was wrong. Nancy didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or try to fix anything. She just listened, passing me napkins, letting me purge years of suppressed emotion into the space between us. When I finally ran out of words, she reached across the table and took my hand. I'm going to say something, and you're not going to want to hear it. But I need you to listen anyway, okay? I nodded, wiping my eyes with a wadded-up napkin. Nancy didn't sugarcoat it. She said what I'd been too afraid to think. He's having an affair. He's abusing you. You need to get out. It's textbook emotional abuse, she said, her voice gentle but firm. The gaslighting, the isolation, making you doubt your own perception of reality. This isn't love. This isn't even like. This is one person systematically destroying another person's sense of self. I wanted to defend him. The words were right there on my tongue. All the excuses I'd rehearsed so many times. But I couldn't say them. Because sitting across from someone who actually cared about me, I could finally see how insane those excuses sounded. But he takes care of me, I heard myself say weakly. He drives me to appointments. Does the bare minimum required to maintain the appearance of being a decent husband? Nancy finished. That's not care. That's image management. And from what you're telling me, he resents even that much. The truth of her words hit me like ice water. He did resent it. Every appointment, every prescription, every moment of my illness was a personal affront to him. And I'd been apologizing for it, as if being sick was something I was doing to him deliberately. Nancy told me something that night that stuck with me. She said studies show that 28 to 30% of victims suffer psychological abuse. That's almost a third of people. I wasn't some rare case. I wasn't weak or stupid or overly sensitive. I was a statistic, and statistics meant there were others like me, which meant what I was experiencing was real and documentable, and not just in my head. You know what the most dangerous thing about psychological abuse is? Nancy asked, stirring her coffee. It's invisible. People look at you and don't see injuries, so they assume you're fine. You start to assume you're fine. You gaslight yourself because there's no broken bones, no black eyes, nothing that qualifies as real abuse in people's minds. I keep thinking maybe I'm overreacting, I admitted. Maybe he's just stressed from work. Maybe I'm being too demanding. Stop, Nancy said firmly. That's his voice in your head, not yours. The woman I knew would never tolerate being treated like this. Where did she go? I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did. And it was too painful to say out loud. She'd been slowly erased, year by year, criticism by criticism, until nothing remained but this hollow shell trying desperately to be enough for someone who would never think she was. That validation, as strange as it sounds, was what I needed. Someone acknowledging that what I was going through had a name, that it followed patterns, that it was recognized abuse even without bruises to show for it. We talked for 3 hours. Nancy asked me questions no one had asked in years. What did I want? What made me happy? What would I do if I could do anything? I didn't have answers. I'd spent so long being what Robert needed that I'd forgotten I was allowed to want things for myself. If money wasn't an issue, Nancy pressed, if you didn't have to worry about insurance or medical bills or any of it, what would you do? I opened my mouth to say I didn't know, then stopped, because I did know. I'd been thinking about it every day since winning that lottery. I'd leave, I whispered. I'd get my own place, somewhere small and peaceful. I'd wake up without worrying about his mood. I'd eat what I wanted, when I wanted. I'd make friends again. I'd remember what it feels like to be happy. Nancy smiled. Then do it. I can't. I don't have the money to. Find a way, she interrupted. Seriously, there are resources, shelters, legal aid, programs for people escaping abusive situations. You don't have to stay just because leaving seems financially impossible. I almost told her about the lottery ticket then. Almost confessed that money wasn't the issue anymore. But something held me back. Maybe I wasn't ready to share that secret yet. Maybe I needed to figure out what I was going to do with it first. What I did say was, I think I need to know for sure about the affair. I need proof. Nancy looked at me for a long moment. Will proof change anything? Will it make leaving easier if you have concrete evidence? Yes, I said, and realized I meant it. I need to know I'm not crazy. I need something undeniable. Okay, Nancy said. Then let's get you proof. On the drive home, I made a decision. I was going to find out the truth, not by asking Robert, because I already knew he'd lie. I was going to investigate. The woman who'd spent 18 years trusting blindly was going to open her eyes. I started with the obvious places. His phone, which he'd recently put a passcode on for the first time in our marriage. His excuse was work security, but I knew better now. I waited until he was in the shower one morning and tried our anniversary. Wrong. His birthday. Wrong. Then, on a hunch, I tried the birthday of his secretary, Christina. It opened. The fact that it was her birthday made me physically nauseous. He'd changed his passcode to another woman's birthday. Not ours. Not his mother's. Another woman's. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through his messages. There were dozens of conversations I'd never seen. Group chats making fun of wives and girlfriends. Texts with Christina that were far too familiar. And then, messages with someone named Brittany. Messages that made my stomach turn. The group chat was called Ball and Chain and consisted of Robert and 4 other men I recognized from his work. They shared memes about nagging wives, complained about having to attend family events, joked about their various affairs. It was vile, disgusting. And Robert was an active participant, sharing stories about me that made me want to vomit. One message from 2 weeks ago. Wife wanted me to stay home tonight because she wasn't feeling well. Told her I had a work emergency, currently at Brittany's. Sometimes being a heartless bastard has its perks. The responses were laughing emojis and congratulations. These were grown men, some of them married, celebrating each other's cruelty. I screenshot everything, my hands trembling so badly I could barely tap the buttons. Sent them to my email. Deleted the sent message. Put his phone back exactly where he'd left it. Brittany worked at the hospital. That's all I could gather from the texts. She was young, probably in her 20s from the way she wrote. And Robert was promising her things. A future together. Freedom from his sick wife who was holding him back. His words. His sick wife holding him back. One message made me particularly sick. Just got back from another one of her endless appointments. She's not even that sick, just dramatic. Brittany, baby, I can't wait until I'm free of this. You and me, we're going to have the life I deserve. The life he deserved. As if I was preventing him from happiness, rather than being someone who'd loved and supported him for 18 years. As if my cardiac condition was a personal attack on his quality of life. I sat there on our bathroom floor, reading message after message, feeling like I was underwater. Everything was muffled and distant and unreal. This was my husband, the man who'd vowed to be with me in sickness and in health, and he was telling this girl that I was the obstacle to his happiness. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I confront him right then? Why didn't I throw the phone at him and demand an explanation? Because I needed more. I needed to be absolutely sure. And some part of me, the part that still remembered that laughing woman from the honeymoon photo, needed to have a plan before I revealed my hand. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was investigating my husband's betrayal while sitting on a $26 million secret. We were both living double lives, but mine was about survival. His was about selfish desire. I started paying attention to his schedule, noticed patterns. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, he had late meetings, except his company's website showed no Tuesday or Thursday recurring meetings. I called his office once, pretending to be from his dentist confirming an appointment. His secretary, sweet Christina, who he'd never mentioned, was gorgeous based on her LinkedIn profile, told me Robert had already left for the day. It was 2 p.m. I kept a calendar on my phone, marking every unexplained absence, every late night, every suspicious expense. The pattern was so obvious once I started looking. How had I missed it for so long? Or had I not missed it at all? Just convinced myself I was imagining things? I hired a private investigator. Used money from my mother's account, paid in cash. His name was Frank, and he looked exactly like you'd expect a Phoenix PI to look. Weathered, skeptical, and efficient. I gave him Robert's photo, his work address, his license plate number. Frank said he'd have something for me within a week. It took 3 days. Meeting Frank to review his findings felt surreal. We met at a Denny's off the highway, anonymous and unremarkable. He slid a manila envelope across the table like we were in a spy movie. "I'm sorry," he said, before I even opened it. "This is never the fun part of the job." The photos Frank showed me were worse than the texts. Robert and Brittany at a restaurant, his hand on her thigh under the table. Robert and Brittany going into a hotel, not coming out for hours. Robert and Brittany at the hospital, where I'd had my last cardiac appointment, him pressing her against a wall in what I recognized as a staff corridor. There was one photo that particularly destroyed me. Robert and Brittany at a coffee shop, her laughing at something he was saying. The look on his face was one I remembered from our early days. Adoring, engaged, present. When was the last time he'd looked at me like that? The nurse. He was sleeping with my nurse. The one who'd checked my vitals, asked about my symptoms, told me everything would be okay. She'd stood there with her hand on my wrist, counting my heartbeat, while knowing she was sleeping with my husband. "She works at Banner Desert Medical Center," Frank said, consulting his notes. "Been employed there for about 18 months. From what I can tell, the relationship started around 6 months ago." 6 months. Half a year of lies. Half a year of her taking my pulse and asking how I was feeling while sleeping with my husband. The violation felt complete, total, like there was no sacred space left unpolluted by his betrayal. Frank was apologetic, said he wished he had better news. I paid him his fee and drove home in a daze. I parked in our driveway and just sat there, staring at our house. Our life. Our lie. The house looked the same as always. Front porch still needed painting. Succulents still somehow surviving. Solar lights lining the walkway. From the outside, you'd never know it was a mausoleum. A tomb for a marriage that had died years ago. That night, Robert came home late again. I had dinner waiting. I'd made spaghetti, simple and easy. He kissed me on the forehead, asked how my day was, and sat down to eat. I watched him across the table, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and felt absolutely nothing. "How was work?" I asked, twirling pasta on my fork. "Busy. The Henderson account is killing me. Stayed late to finish the projections." Lie. Frank had sent me a time-stamped photo of Robert's car at the Scottsdale Hotel at 7 p.m., but I just nodded, smiled, played along. Must be stressful. "You have no idea," he said, not looking up from his plate. "No," I thought. "You have no idea what I know, what I'm planning. How completely your life is about to change. Do you know what emotional emptiness feels like? It's not sadness. Sadness still has feeling to it, weight, substance. This was hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left just skin and bones, going through the motions of being alive." I started planning, quietly, carefully, methodically. First thing I did was secure my lottery winnings. I claimed the prize anonymously through a legal trust Nancy helped me set up. The money went into accounts Robert didn't know existed, under a structure he couldn't touch even if he found out. $26 million, safely tucked away from his lying hands. Setting up the trust required meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, people who asked careful questions about protecting assets from future claims. I told them I wanted privacy, protection, autonomy. They didn't ask why. Maybe they'd seen enough people in my situation to know. Nancy went with me to some of the meetings. She asked questions I wouldn't have known to ask, pushed back on recommendations that didn't serve my interests. Having her there, this person who was unequivocally on my side, felt revolutionary. Then I started organizing the attic. It's funny how that became my cover. Robert never questioned why I suddenly wanted to clean out years of accumulated junk. I told him I needed a project, something to keep my mind occupied between doctor's appointments. He seemed relieved that I had something to do besides be sick around him. "Whatever keeps you busy," he'd said, barely glancing up from his phone. But what I was really doing was documenting our life. Every shared account, every asset, every piece of property. I made copies of everything. Bank statements showing his mysterious withdrawals. Credit card bills showing purchases I never benefited from. Titles, deeds, insurance policies. I built a case without even meaning to, just by organizing our paperwork. That's when I found the receipts. They were tucked inside an old copy of a book about golf that Robert had never read. I don't know why he'd hidden them there. Maybe he'd forgotten about them. Maybe he thought I'd never look. But there they were. Receipts for jewelry I'd never received. Dinners at restaurants on nights he'd told me he was working late. Hotel stays in Sedona, Flagstaff, even Las Vegas, places we'd never been together. One receipt particularly stung. Marcello's, the Italian restaurant I'd wanted to go to for our 15th anniversary. Robert had said it was too expensive. We couldn't afford it. But here was a receipt showing he'd taken someone else there 6 months later. Spent $273 on a romantic dinner, just not with me. I sat in that dusty attic, holding these pieces of paper that represented my husband's secret life, and something shifted inside me. The ice that had been cracking finally shattered. I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry, but it was a cold anger, calculated, the kind that makes you dangerous because it doesn't make you stupid. I'd spent months being the victim, doubting myself, accepting his gaslighting. Now I was done being prey. It was time to be the predator. I found an old photo album buried under some boxes. Our wedding photos. Me in white, young and hopeful. Robert in his tux, looking proud. Our families gathered around us. My mother, gone now, smiling at the camera. She'd been so happy that day, so relieved I'd found someone to take care of me. If only she'd known how that would turn out. Maybe she'd have told me to run. Or maybe, given her own history with my father, she'd have told me to stay, to endure, to call it love and sacrifice myself on that altar just like she had. There was this one photo that broke me. Just me, no one else in frame. I was laughing at something, my whole face bright with joy. My dress was perfect, my makeup flawless, my eyes full of dreams. I looked at that photo and didn't recognize her. Where had she gone? When did I stop being that woman who laughed like that? I realized I was looking at a stranger, someone I used to be. Someone Robert had systematically destroyed over 18 years of marriage. And I made a decision, right there, sitting in that attic surrounded by the detritus of our life together. I was going to find her again. That laughing woman, that hopeful girl. She was still in there somewhere, buried under years of criticism and control and psychological torture. But first, I had to burn down the prison I'd built around her. Nancy became my lifeline during those weeks. We met for coffee regularly, and I told her everything. The lottery winnings, the investigation, the evidence I was gathering. She never judged me for staying as long as I had. She just helped me plan my escape. She was the one who suggested I cut Robert off financially. It seemed extreme at first. We had joint accounts, joint credit cards. How could I just freeze him out? But Nancy pointed out that he'd been using our money to fund his affair. Every dinner with Brittany, every hotel room, every piece of jewelry had come from our shared resources. Why should I keep funding my own betrayal? Think about it, Nancy said over coffee one morning. You've been the primary beneficiary of your mother's estate, right? That money, even though it was deposited into joint accounts, technically has a different origin. And Robert's been using marital funds to commit adultery, which is still legally relevant in Arizona. She'd done her research. I shouldn't have been surprised. Nancy had always been thorough. But if I cut him off, he'll know something's wrong. He'll figure out I'm planning to leave. So let him figure it out. What's he going to do? Be angry? Manipulate you? Gaslight you? He's already doing all of that. At least this way you're protecting yourself financially. She was right. And the thought of taking his power away, of being the one in control for once, was intoxicating. So I did it. Slowly, carefully, over the course of 2 weeks. I transferred money out of our joint accounts into new ones in just my name. I canceled our joint credit cards and opened new ones he wasn't authorized on. I changed passwords, updated automatic payments, rerouted our finances so thoroughly that he'd need a forensic accountant to find our money. Every transfer felt like taking a piece of myself back. Every password change was a small act of revolution. I was reclaiming my autonomy, dollar by dollar, decision by decision. It felt powerful, like I was taking something back. Not just money, but control, agency, the right to make decisions about my own life. Robert noticed, of course, started complaining that his card wasn't working. I played dumb, suggested maybe there was fraud. Maybe he should call the bank. He was so used to me handling our finances that he didn't even question it at first. Just assumed I'd fix it like I fixed everything else. But I didn't fix it. I watched him get more and more frustrated, more and more confused, watched him finally realize that something was very wrong, and I smiled. You want to know something terrible? I enjoyed it. Enjoyed watching him panic, watching him try to figure out what was happening. After years of being gaslit and manipulated, it felt good to be the one with the secrets, the one with the power. I had another cardiology appointment scheduled. Same hospital where Brittany worked. Robert was supposed to drive me, like always. Be the dutiful husband, hold my hand, listen to the doctor explain my condition. I almost canceled it. The thought of being in that building, knowing she was there, knowing they were meeting in staff corridors while I lay in exam rooms, it made me sick. But then I thought, why should I hide? Why should I be the one who's embarrassed? I wasn't the one having an affair. I wasn't the one lying. So I kept the appointment, and I made sure Robert knew he was expected to be there. The morning of the appointment, he complained about missing work. I pointed out that he'd never seemed to worry about missing work on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. The look on his face was priceless. Just for a second, he froze. Guilt flashed across his features before he covered it with annoyance. Told me I was being paranoid again, that my heart condition was making me unstable. My heart condition, I repeated slowly, is making me unstable. You know what I mean? The stress of being sick, the medications, it's affecting your thinking. I almost laughed. Right. Because noticing that my husband leaves the house every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. and doesn't come back until 11 is clearly delusional thinking. His jaw clenched. I've explained that. Work meetings. Of course, work meetings. How could I forget? I didn't argue, just smiled and got in the car. The hospital waiting room was crowded that day. I checked in, took my seat, watched Robert fidget with his phone. He kept glancing toward the nurse's station, looking for someone, looking for her. I wondered if he'd texted her, warned her I was coming, if they had some signal worked out, some way to pretend they were strangers. The waiting room smelled like hand sanitizer and fear. Babies cried in their mother's arms. An elderly man dozed in his wheelchair. Daytime television played on a mounted screen, volume too low to hear over the general chaos. I sat there with my clipboard of intake forms, watching my husband watch for his mistress, and marveled at the absurdity of it all. When they called my name, Robert stood up with me. The nurse who came to get us was older, professional, not Brittany. I saw the disappointment on Robert's face. He'd been hoping to see her. Hoping for what? A secret smile? A quick touch when I wasn't looking? The examination took longer than usual. My blood pressure was up, my heart rate irregular. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, asked if I'd been under any stress lately. I almost laughed. Stress? What a polite word for having your entire life implode. Robert jumped in before I could answer. Said I'd been acting strange lately, paranoid, making accusations. Dr. Patel looked at me, not him. Asked if that was true. I could have denied it. Could have played along. But something about the way she asked, like she was really listening, made me pause. I told her I'd discovered my husband was having an affair with one of the hospital staff. Said it calmly, matter-of-factly, like I was reporting a symptom. Robert's face went white, started to sputter denials. Dr. Patel held up a hand to silence him, asked me if I needed anything, support services, a social worker, security to walk me to my car. I declined, said I had it under control, and I did. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely in control. Dr. Patel gave Robert a look that could have frozen lava. "Mr. Henderson, I'm going to ask you to wait in the waiting room while I complete this examination. But I'm her husband. And she's my patient. Waiting room, now." He left, but not before shooting me a look that promised retribution later. I didn't care. I was done being afraid of his anger. Once he was gone, Dr. Patel turned to me with genuine concern. "Are you safe at home?" The question surprised me. He's never physically hurt me. "There are many kinds of hurt," she said gently. "If you need resources, help leaving, I can connect you with people." I assured her I had a plan, that I was taking steps to protect myself. She made notes in my chart, then asked me to continue monitoring my symptoms and stress levels. "Cardiac health and emotional stress are closely linked," she said. "Taking care of one means taking care of the other." After the appointment, Robert drove us home in silence. When we pulled into the driveway, he finally spoke, asked how I could embarrass him like that, make those accusations in front of a doctor. What would people think? I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I didn't care what people thought. Didn't care about maintaining the illusion of our perfect marriage. Didn't care about his reputation or his feelings or anything about him at all. I told him I had proof. Told him I knew about Brittany, about Christina, about all of it. He tried to deny it at first, then got angry, then tried to turn it around on me, said I was violating his privacy by checking his phone, that I was controlling and suspicious and driving him away. "I drove you away?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. "I drove you to sleep with my nurse? I drove you to spend thousands of our dollars on hotel rooms and jewelry and dinners with other women. Please, explain to me how I'm responsible for your choices." "You've been impossible to live with," he shouted, "always sick, always needing something, always making everything about you and your health problems. I have a cardiac condition, Robert. I didn't choose this." "Well, I didn't choose it either. I didn't sign up to be a caretaker for the rest of my life." There it was. The truth he'd been dancing around for years. He resented me for being sick, resented having to care about my health, my needs, my existence. I let him talk, let him dig his hole deeper. Then I told him I wanted a divorce, said it quietly, without emotion, like I was telling him what to pick up from the grocery store. The look on his face was almost worth 18 years of misery. Almost. He tried everything after that. Tears, anger, promises to change, claims that Brittany meant nothing, that he loved me, that we could work through this. I listened to it all with the same detached calm I'd felt in Dr. Patel's office. You think that was it, right? That I kicked him out and moved on with my life? But it wasn't that simple. Because Robert was a fighter, and he'd built a whole narrative about me being the unstable, paranoid wife. He'd told his friends, his co-workers, probably Brittany and Christina, and whoever else would listen. I was the villain in his story, the burden, the obstacle to his happiness, and he wasn't about to let that story change without a fight. The Phoenix community isn't that large, especially in our social circles. Robert had been methodical about poisoning the well. Every couple we knew, every neighbor, every casual acquaintance had heard his version. The version where I was controlling, where my heart condition made me irrational, where he was the long-suffering husband just trying his best. I knew this because they started calling, our friends, suggesting maybe I was being hasty, maybe I should give Robert another chance, maybe my medications were affecting my judgment. The same gaslighting Robert had been doing for years, now outsourced to our social network. Nancy was furious when I told her, said I should sue him for defamation. But I had a better idea. I was going to tell my story, the real one, and I was going to do it publicly. There was a community fundraiser coming up, annual thing for the local food bank. held at the community center off Tatum Boulevard. Everyone we knew would be there. All of Robert's colleagues, all our friends, all the neighbors who'd been giving me pitying looks for months. I bought a ticket. Robert did too, separately, probably planning to bring Brittany and parade her around like some kind of victory. I showed up alone, wearing a red dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Not morning black, not defeated gray, defiant, powerful red. The look on Robert's face when he saw me was everything. He'd probably assumed I'd hide at home, too embarrassed to show my face. Instead, I walked right up to the group of people he was chatting with and smiled. Someone made an awkward comment about being surprised to see me. I said I wouldn't miss it for the world, that I had something important to share with everyone. Robert tried to shut me down, said maybe we should talk privately first, but I was done with private, done with keeping secrets to protect his reputation. I stood up in front of that room full of people and told them everything. The affair, the gaslighting, the financial abuse, the way he'd systematically isolated me and made me doubt my own sanity. I showed them the evidence, right there on my phone. Screenshots of texts, photos from the private investigator, receipts for jewelry I'd never received. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Robert's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally, fear. Because the story was out, the real one. And it was a lot harder to gaslight an entire room full of people who could see the evidence with their own eyes. Someone asked why I was sharing this. Fair question. I told them that for months, Robert had been telling people I was unstable, paranoid, crazy, and I wanted them to see the truth. To understand that when someone tells you their partner is irrational, you should consider asking why they want you to believe that. Studies show that 9% of seniors suffer verbal or psychological abuse. I told them that. Said I was part of that statistic, and I refused to be silent about it anymore. That every time we dismiss someone's claims of abuse as paranoia or oversensitivity, we become complicit in that abuse. Robert left. Just walked out of the fundraiser without a word. Brittany, who had been standing near the back, followed him. I watched them go and felt nothing but relief. The aftermath was interesting. Some people apologized, said they'd had no idea. Others avoided me entirely, uncomfortable with having to reconcile their image of our marriage with reality. A few women pulled me aside privately, told me their own stories of emotional abuse, thanked me for speaking up. Nancy was proud, said I'd done the hardest thing, choosing public truth over private suffering. She was right. It had been hard, but it had also been necessary. Robert tried to salvage his reputation afterward, sent emails to mutual friends claiming I'd had a breakdown at the fundraiser, that my accusations were the result of medication side effects and mental instability. But the evidence was out there. People had seen it, and his denials just made him look worse. He moved out 2 weeks later. Went to stay with his brother in Tucson, unable to face the community that now saw him for what he was. Brittany apparently broke things off shortly after the fundraiser. Turns out she'd believed his story about me being the crazy wife. Once she realized he'd been lying to her too, manipulating her the same way he'd manipulated me, she wanted nothing to do with him. The divorce was ugly but quick. Robert tried to claim he deserved half of everything. My lawyer, a shark of a woman Nancy recommended, pointed out that Arizona is a community property state, but that didn't mean he was entitled to assets he didn't know existed. The lottery money, safely tucked away in my trust, never came up. He got half of what we'd accumulated during the marriage. I got my freedom. He fought for the house, said he'd contributed more financially over the years. My lawyer presented evidence of his affair spending, argued that he'd been misappropriating marital funds. The judge wasn't sympathetic. I got the house. The final hearing was surreal. Standing in a courtroom, listening to a judge dissolve 18 years of marriage with a few legal phrases. Robert wouldn't even look at me. Just stared at his hands, diminished and defeated. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him, but mostly I just felt tired. When it was over, when the judge's gavel came down and I was officially no longer Mrs. Robert Henderson, I walked out of that courthouse and took the deepest breath I'd taken in years. The Phoenix sky was that perfect desert blue, endless and clean. I stood there on the courthouse steps, letting the sun warm my face, and thought about that laughing woman in the wedding photo. She was back, battered and scarred, but back. I sold the house 3 months after the divorce was finalized. Too many memories, too much history. I bought a small cottage in Prescott, up in the mountains where the air is cooler and the pace is slower. It's nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, a porch that overlooks pine trees instead of desert scrub. Nancy helped me move. We spent a weekend hauling boxes and furniture, laughing at how much junk I'd accumulated over the years. She asked what I was going to do with all that lottery money. I told her I hadn't decided yet. Maybe travel, maybe start a foundation, maybe just exist for a while without having to justify my choices to anyone. The truth is, the money matters less than I thought it would. It's security, sure. It means I'll never have to depend on anyone again, never have to stay in a situation because I can't afford to leave. But what really changed my life wasn't winning the lottery. It was deciding I was worth saving. My health has improved, ironically. Turns out chronic stress from psychological abuse isn't great for cardiac function. Who knew? Dr. Patel transferred my care to a cardiologist in Prescott, a kind older man who actually listens when I describe my symptoms. My blood pressure is down, my heart rate is stable, I'm sleeping better than I have in years. I wake up in my cottage, make coffee, and sit on my porch watching the sun rise. Sometimes Nancy visits. Sometimes I drive down to Phoenix to meet old friends who stood by me. Mostly, I just exist peacefully, rediscovering who I am without someone telling me who I should be. Robert is living somewhere in California now, I heard. Someone mentioned he'd gotten engaged to a woman he met online. I hope she's smarter than I was. I hope she asks questions. I hope she doesn't sacrifice herself the way I did. But that's not my responsibility anymore. He's not my responsibility anymore. I found that wedding photo, the one of me laughing. It's in a box somewhere, packed away with all the other remnants of that life. I thought about burning it, making some symbolic gesture of letting go. But I kept it instead. Because that woman in the photo? She wasn't wrong to be happy. She wasn't stupid for believing in love. She just picked the wrong person to give her trust to. And that's not her fault. It's his. I'm dating again, actually. Nothing serious. Just coffee here and there with a retired teacher I met at the library. He's gentle and funny and treats me like a human being instead of an obligation. We're taking it slow. I'm in no hurry to merge my life with anyone else's. The other day, he asked me what I wanted out of life. Not what I wanted from a relationship or what my 5-year plan was. Just what I wanted. I realized no one had asked me that in almost 2 decades. Robert never cared what I wanted, only what I could do for him. I told him I wanted peace, simplicity, the freedom to wake up each day without fear. He smiled and said that seemed reasonable. And it does. After everything, reasonable feels revolutionary. Before I finish my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something I wish someone had told me years ago. It's about the system we rely on when things go wrong, and how often that system fails us. When you're being abused, everyone tells you to report it, go to the police, get a restraining order, let the system protect you. And sometimes that works. Sometimes the authorities intervene, and justice is served and you get the protection you need. But often, it doesn't work that way, especially with psychological abuse. There are no bruises to photograph, no broken bones to x-ray, just your word against theirs. And if your abuser has spent years building a narrative about you being unstable or paranoid, who do you think people are going to believe? I tried to report Robert's financial abuse, showed bank statements to the police. They said it was a civil matter, told me to get a divorce lawyer. I tried to explain the gaslighting, the isolation, the systematic destruction of my sense of self. They looked at me with pity and suggested I see a therapist. The system isn't built for this kind of abuse. It's built for visible violence, for clear-cut assault, for situations that fit neatly into legal definitions. Psychological torture, financial manipulation, those exist in gray areas that the law struggles to address. So what do you do when the system fails you? You build your own support network. You find resources outside official channels. You connect with people who understand what you're going through because they've lived it too. There are domestic violence organizations that specialize in emotional abuse, online communities where survivors share strategies, therapists who are trained in trauma and manipulation, financial advisors who can help you secure your assets, lawyers who understand the nuances of psychological abuse and know how to document it for court. You become your own advocate. You educate yourself about narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, financial control. You learn the language that describes what's happening to you. Because once you can name it, you can fight it. And you document everything. Every conversation, every text, every instance of manipulation or control. Not because the police will necessarily care, but because you might need that evidence later. For a divorce, for a custody battle, for the moment when you finally decide to leave and need to prove why. I kept a journal during my marriage. Started it when things began to feel wrong, but I couldn't articulate why. Wrote down the things Robert said, the ways he made me feel, the patterns I was starting to notice. That journal became evidence in my divorce, proved his long-term psychological abuse in a way my testimony alone couldn't. Find your people, the ones who won't question your reality or suggest you're overreacting. The ones who will believe you when you say something's wrong, even if they can't see the evidence. Nancy was that person for me. Without her validation, I might still be doubting myself. And here's the hardest part, the thing no one wants to hear. Sometimes you have to save yourself. The system won't do it. Well-meaning friends won't do it. Even people who love you can't do it. Only you can decide you're worth saving and take the steps necessary to save yourself. That might mean leaving with nothing. Might mean starting over from scratch. Might mean accepting that you won't get the justice you deserve, that your abuser won't face consequences, that people will believe their lies about you. But you still have to leave, because staying will destroy you. I got lucky. The lottery money gave me options most abuse victims don't have. But even without that money, I would have left eventually. I know that now. Because once you see the abuse for what it is, once you stop making excuses and accepting gaslighting, you can't unsee it. And living with that knowledge while staying is its own special hell. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself in my story, please hear me. It's not in your head. You're not crazy. You're not too sensitive or paranoid or irrational. If someone is making you feel that way, especially someone who claims to love you, that's abuse. And you deserve better. You deserve to wake up without anxiety, to make decisions without fear, to exist without constantly monitoring someone else's mood, to be treated with basic human respect and dignity. These aren't luxuries, they're fundamental rights. And if the system won't protect those rights, if the people around you won't validate your experience, then you protect yourself. You validate yourself. You become the authority on your own life and refuse to let anyone else dictate your reality. It won't be easy. Leaving never is, especially when you've invested years in a relationship. You'll doubt yourself. You'll second guess. You'll have moments where you wonder if you're making a mistake. That's normal. That's the psychological damage of abuse talking. Push through it. Find one person who believes you, just one. Build from there. Create a safety plan. Secure your finances if you can. Document the abuse. And when you're ready, when you've gathered your strength and your resources, leave. And don't look back. Your abuser will try to pull you back. They always do. Will promise to change, to get help, to be better. Don't believe them. Abusers rarely change, because change requires acknowledging they were wrong. And people who systematically destroy their partner's sense of reality don't typically have that kind of self-awareness. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. You don't need proof to leave. You don't need to convince anyone else that the abuse is real. You just need to know it yourself and act accordingly. And afterward, when you're safe and free and rebuilding your life, be patient with yourself. Healing from psychological abuse takes time. You'll have triggers. You'll catch yourself monitoring people's moods, walking on eggshells, making yourself small. That's trauma, and it doesn't disappear overnight. But slowly, with therapy and time and distance from your abuser, you'll remember who you were before. You'll rediscover your voice, your strength, your right to take up space in the world. And one day, you'll realize you've gone a whole week without thinking about them. Then a month, then longer. The abuse will always be part of your story. But it doesn't have to be the whole story. You get to write the next chapters yourself. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this. I know it was heavy. I know it probably brought up difficult feelings, whether you've experienced this yourself or watched someone you love go through it. That's the reality of abuse. It ripples outward, touching everyone in its vicinity. I'm curious where you're listening from. Are you in Phoenix, like me? Somewhere else in the desert Southwest? Across the country? Drop a comment and let me know what city you're in and what time it is where you are. There's something comforting about knowing we're all here together, sharing these stories across distance. If my story resonated with you, if you felt seen or validated or understood, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. And we need that. We need people to understand that abuse isn't always visible. That psychological torture is real and damaging and deserves to be taken seriously. I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to know your answer. Do you think Robert got what he deserved? He lost his reputation, his marriage, his place in the community, but he's rebuilding somewhere else. He didn't face legal consequences. He's probably telling his new fiancée the same lies he told Brittany about me. Is that justice, or did he get away with it? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have gone public at that fundraiser? Would you have pursued legal action even knowing the system wasn't built for this kind of abuse? Would you have left sooner or stayed longer trying to make it work? There's no right answer. Every situation is unique. Every person's breaking point is different. But I think having these conversations matters. Sharing our stories and our strategies and our hard-won wisdom. That's how we protect each other. That's how we create change. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. Every week there's a new story, a new perspective, a new reminder that you're not alone in whatever you're going through. And check out the videos I'm going to link below. There's one about recognizing gaslighting in relationships that I wish I'd seen years ago. And another about financial abuse and how to protect yourself. Knowledge is power, especially when you're dealing with someone who wants to keep you powerless. Arm yourself with information. Educate yourself about the tactics abusers use. Learn the warning signs. And if you see them in your own life or the life of someone you care about, act. Because here's what I learned from all of this. Silence protects abusers. Speaking up protects victims. Every time we share our stories, every time we refuse to keep their secrets, every time we choose honesty over maintaining the illusion of a perfect life, we chip away at the power they hold. My story had a happy ending because I had resources and support and luck. Not everyone does. But everyone deserves one. Everyone deserves to wake up free and peaceful and hopeful about their future. Everyone deserves to be the protagonist of their own story instead of a supporting character in someone else's. So take care of yourself, trust yourself, and remember that you're worth fighting for, even when you have to be the one doing the fighting.